Long ago, in quiet monasteries built high among clouds, monks learned that true wisdom isn't found through effort, but through stillness. When the body is at rest, the heart begins to speak. Before we start, take a deep, grounding breath. Feel it rise through the spine and fall softly through the body. Now find a comfortable position, lying down, sitting upright, or leaning against something that supports you fully. Let gravity hold you. These stories are like mountain air, clear, cool, and timeless. They invite no urgency, no competition, no outcome, only presence. If you'd like, share where you are listening from. Maybe describe the hour, night or dawn, or how the world sounds outside your window. Each of us is breathing under the same sky, listening for the same stillness. Let your exhale slow. Feel your pulse quiet. The mountain waits for no one, yet welcomes all. And with that, our story unfolds. In the heart of the Himalayan foothills, where the clouds hung low and the trees grew tall enough to brush the sky, there lived an elephant unlike any other. He was large, yes, towering and strong. But it was not his size that set him apart. It was his silence, his gentleness, the way he walked through the forest without disturbing a single leaf. The other animals called him Chadanta, though few ever spoke directly to him. They simply watched, from trees, from burrows, from the safety of shadow, as he moved like a mountain in motion. He was the Buddha in a past life. And this is the story of his strength, not in battle, but in sacrifice. Chadanta lived alone by choice. He did not shun the world, but neither did he cling to it. He bathed in still lakes at sunrise. He ate from the same fig tree each day, taking only what he needed. When storms came, he broke branches to shelter smaller creatures. And when conflict stirred among the animals, he was the one they turned to, not for punishment, but for peace. Yet peace often invites jealousy, and far from the forest, deep within a palace carved of stone and silence, a queen sat with bitterness in her heart. She had once lived in that forest, a doe, soft-eyed and quiet, and long ago, when Chadanta had ruled a great elephant herd, she had been among them. She had loved him, deeply, without condition, but he had never looked her way, never spoken her name, never returned what she offered. And so, in her next life, reborn as a queen, she remembered only the wound, and she wanted revenge. She summoned the royal hunter and said, "In the northern forest lives a white-tusked elephant. His hide is pale, his eyes are gold. Bring me his tusks, no matter the cost." The hunter hesitated. It is said that he is gentle, wise. "All the more reason," she said, "to prove that the gentle can bleed." And so, with blade and bow, the hunter travelled north, through jungle, through rain, through weeks of silence, until he found the clearing near the fig tree. There stood Chadanta, still, listening to the wind. The hunter watched from behind the trees. He waited 3 days, but the elephant did nothing wrong. He did not rage, did not attack, did not falter. Only once did he cry out, and that was when he helped a small bird fallen from its nest. On the 4th morning, the hunter stepped forward. Chadanta turned, and in that moment he knew. He saw the blade, saw the sorrow, saw the karma rising like fog. and yet he did not move. "You have come for my tusks," he said. The hunter froze. "How did you—" "I remember," Chadanta said. "She was hurt. She never let it go." The wind stirred the trees. The lake nearby rippled. "I will not fight you," he said. "Take what you came for." The hunter lowered his bow. "But I cannot kill you." "Then don't," said the elephant. "I will kneel. You may take the tusks. Spare the rest." And slowly, with the dignity of one who walks willingly toward pain, Chadanta lowered himself to the earth. The hunter wept as he worked, not because the task was hard, but because the elephant never once flinched. When the blade cut deep, he did not cry out. When the ivory came free, he did not recoil. He only said quietly, "May she find peace now." The hunter carried the tusks back to the palace, and when the queen saw them, gleaming, perfect, wrapped in bloodied cloth, she felt no triumph, only weight. She touched them once, and then began to shake, for in that moment her memories returned fully, not of rejection, but of Chadanta lifting a fallen calf, of standing watch while others slept, of refusing to harm a single creature even when threatened. And now, that being had offered his very body. For her. She collapsed, and in her next life, it is said, she returned to the forest as a healer, not to take tusks, but to mend wounds. The story of Chadanta spread far beyond the forest. Monks carved his image into cave walls. Children whispered his name when they felt afraid, not because he was mighty, but because he proved that strength is not in what you strike, but in what you endure for the sake of others. Because true power needs no roar, it needs no armor. It needs only presence and the willingness to give without hatred, even to those who once wished you harm. The monsoon rains had passed, and the forest paths of Kosambi steamed with quiet life. Leaves dripped with silver beads. Frogs croaked low from the shadows. And above it all, the scent of wet bark and jasmine lingered like breath held too long. Under a canopy of tall sal trees, the Buddha sat surrounded by monks. They had walked for days to gather here. Some were old, most were young, their robes still crisp from devotion, their minds still sharp with questions. And today, the Blessed One had agreed to speak, not of morality, nor of meditation, but of something far subtler, of misunderstanding. He began, not with pronouncement, but with silence. Then, as the breeze shifted through the trees, he spoke. "There are those," he said, "who come to the Dharma like a man searching for a serpent." A few monks glanced up. Serpents were no small matter in these woods, slender and swift, some deadly, some divine. "This man," the Buddha continued, "is told that a snake dwells near the roots of a great tree, so he goes into the forest to catch it. But he does not learn the proper way. He does not bring a forked stick. He does not wait for the right moment. He sees movement in the grass and lunges with bare hands." A few younger monks leaned forward. "What happens?" one whispered. The Buddha's gaze passed over them like moonlight on water. He seizes the snake by the tail. A ripple of discomfort passed through the listeners. "And the snake," he said, "twists and strikes." He paused. "And so it is with those who take hold of the Dharma wrongly. grasping at the tail, not understanding the nature of what they hold. And when it turns against them, they blame the teaching, never seeing that it was their own hand that erred. Silence fell again. It was not a parable to soothe, but to stir. For many in that circle had studied hard, memorized discourses, debated with pride. They recited verses in the marketplace, corrected others in the villages, and took satisfaction in knowing the words of the Buddha by heart. But the words were not the snake, and the Buddha knew it. A senior monk, Kakana, bowed his head and asked softly, "Blessed One, how does one hold the Dharma correctly?" The Buddha nodded. "Imagine," he said, "a man crossing a river. The current is swift, the far bank promises safety, and he finds no boat, no bridge. So he gathers branches, grass, and reeds. He binds them tightly. He makes a raft." The monks followed, some nodding. With effort, he crosses the water. And when he reaches the other shore, does he carry the raft on his back for the rest of the journey? A few smiled. A few looked unsure. "No," said the Buddha. "He leaves it behind, grateful, respectful, but he does not cling to it. He let that image hang in the warm, moist air. So too is the Dharma," he said, "a raft to cross, not a burden to bear forever, not a weapon to strike others, not a badge to wear." A soft murmur of recognition passed through the monks. "But some," he continued, "treat the Dharma as the man who grabs the snake's tail. They take hold of words, of verses, of rules, not to cross the river, but to shout from the shore." He turned his palm upward. "They say, 'I know,' you do not. They say, 'This is the only way, yours is wrong.' They say, 'I have read, I have memorized, I have mastered.'" He paused. "But what have they understood?" A breeze stirred the forest floor. A leaf spiraled down like a question with no answer. "Understanding," he said, "is not repetition. Wisdom is not memorization, and truth is not a prize to be clutched." He looked at them all. "Do not seize the tail. Learn how the snake moves. Watch, be still, approach with care. Grasp rightly, not to own, but to understand." A young novice, no older than 15, raised his hand timidly. "But Blessed One," he said, "what if one clings to the raft out of reverence, out of gratitude?" The Buddha smiled gently. "Reverence is not the same as attachment," he said. "Gratitude flows like a river. Clinging dams the stream." He folded his hands in his lap. "To let go does not mean to forget. It means to honor the purpose and move on when it has been fulfilled." Several monks bowed. Some looked thoughtful, others uneasy, for the teaching had pierced the pride of many. A monk named Sati, known for his keen memory and rigid interpretations, frowned. "But Lord," he said, "should we not defend the Dharma from false views?" "Yes," said the Buddha without hesitation. "But first, defend it from misunderstanding within yourself. A man who argues from ego may win the debate and lose the path." He looked directly at Sati. "If you know a verse, but use it to shame another, you have caught the tail." He turned to the group once more. "If you teach to elevate yourself, you have caught the tail. If you study only to be praised, you have caught the tail." If you hold to rules to feel superior, you have caught the tail. And if you mistake knowledge for wisdom, you have caught the tail. The forest was utterly still now. Even the birds had quieted. And when the snake turns and bites, the Buddha asked, "You will say the Dharma is false, that it failed you, that it was sharp, cruel, or useless, but the snake was never to blame." A few monks bowed their heads in shame. One of the older mendicants, seated on a mat of grass near the front, exhaled deeply. "I have clutched many tails in my time," he said, "but now I wish only to learn how to see clearly." The Buddha nodded. That is the beginning of wisdom. That evening, as twilight turned the forest gold, the monks moved quietly through the camp. No chants, no debates, just footsteps and thought. Sati sat alone by the fire, his manuscript scrolls untouched. The novice who had asked about the raft sat beside him, quiet, respectful. Sati turned and whispered, "I used to think that knowing every word would make me wise." The boy looked at him. "And now?" Sati stared at the flames. "Now I wonder if I even know how to listen." In the stillness of the forest, the words of the Buddha echoed like a distant bell. "Do not grasp the tail, learn how the snake moves." And in the hearts of those who truly listened, the Dharma shed its scales of pride, of certainty, of rigid form, and began, at last, to breathe. In a sleek glass building downtown, an elevator rose and fell like breath. It carried suits and heels, coffee cups and clipped conversations, laptops glowing with unread messages. And in it stood Daniel. Crisp tie, polished shoes, phone always in hand. Eyes darting to the floor counter. 17, 18, 19, always up. Daniel worked in mergers and acquisitions. His days were booked in color-coded blocks. 10-minute meetings, lunches at his desk, even bathroom breaks planned with precision. He was good, efficient, respected, and completely unable to rest. The elevator was his chapel, the only place he stood still. And even then, his mind climbed faster than the floors. One day, the elevator stopped between levels. A soft jolt, a mechanical sigh, then stillness. Daniel exhaled, checked the buttons, pressed call, tapped the screen on his phone. No service. He cursed, then waited. 5 seconds, 10, a minute, no motion. Panic started to rise. Not fear of being trapped, but fear of not moving. In that silent steel box, Daniel faced the one thing he avoided: stillness. He looked around, at the brushed metal walls, at his own reflection, tight jaw, shallow breath. For the first time in months, he had no signal, no task, no escape. And slowly, something cracked. Not loudly, just a hairline fracture in the illusion. Daniel slumped slightly, loosened his tie, sat down right there on the elevator floor. He exhaled, long and low. He noticed how loud silence is when you're used to constant motion. He watched the display screen, still frozen at level 19. He chuckled. Of course, 19, almost 20. The next promotion, the next salary tier, the next version of himself. Always almost, never here. The Buddha once asked, if you carry a burden endlessly, does it grow heavier or lighter? The answer is, it becomes you, and you forget you are ever free of it. Daniel didn't move, didn't check the time, didn't plan. He just sat, and after a while, he realized he didn't miss anything. The world outside was still spinning, and yet, in here, there was space. 15 minutes passed, then a voice came through the intercom. "Sorry about that, sir. Elevator's back online." A whir, a lurch, and the floor counter resumed its climb. But something in Daniel did not. When the doors opened at 33, he didn't step out. He pressed G, ground floor, and rode all the way back down. No one understood. But for the first time, he didn't care to explain. Presence isn't just stillness. It's not needing to climb when you don't know why you're climbing. The next day, he came to work with a small thermos of tea. No email before 10 a.m. He looked co-workers in the eye, asked how they were, waited for the answer. He still worked hard, still showed up, but something had softened. Something had stopped chasing. Years later, Daniel told a friend, "The best thing I ever did was get stuck." The friend raised an eyebrow. Daniel smiled. "I needed the elevator to stop, so I could finally notice. I didn't want the top floor. Climbing isn't wrong, but climbing without pause forgets the view, and sometimes the highest level is the one where you sit down and breathe." As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. The master was dying. Not suddenly, not tragically, just quietly, like a season completing itself. His name was Master Togen, and he had taught for over 40 years. He never raised his voice, never insisted, never asked to be followed. But people came to him, pilgrims, monks, farmers, children. Because when he looked at you, you felt seen beyond your name. Now, his breath was thin, his hands still, his body a whisper of what it once was. The disciples gathered at his bedside, each wondering the same thing. Would he speak? Would he leave them with one final truth? A farewell teaching? A verse? A koan? They waited, hearts leaning forward. But Master Togen said nothing, not even a word. He only gestured, weakly, to the small table beside his mat. Upon it stood a single candle, lit and steady. The wax had melted low. The flame burned soft but sure. The master's eyes lingered on it. Then he closed them and let go. The room held its breath. The disciples watched the candle. It flickered once, then twice, and just as the master's body cooled, the candle went out. No wind, no touch. It simply ended. This is the story of teaching through presence, of the final lesson not spoken, but lived. Commentary. We often believe the greatest teachings must be loud, dramatic, revolutionary, clear. But in Zen, the most profound truths are quiet. They arrive not with thunder, but with the stillness of a candle extinguishing itself. Master Togen's disciples wanted words, something to cling to quote, to remember. But he gave them something deeper, a mirror. The candle was his body, burning with presence, giving light, warming others, And when its time came, it did not resist, it did not protest, it simply completed its purpose and disappeared. That is the nature of life. To arrive, to offer, to pass. To resist this is to suffer. To accept it is to awaken. Some monks cried. Some stared at the floor. But one young disciple remained still, eyes on the wick. He bowed deeply and said, "I understand." The abbot later asked him, "What did you understand?" The young monk replied, "Nothing lasts, but everything lights the way while it's here." We fear death, but what we fear more is the idea of being forgotten, of being meaningless. So we seek last words, final victories, something to prove we existed. But Master Togen left only a flame, because the point was not to be remembered. It was to burn fully while here. The candle did not save its wax, did not ration its glow. It gave everything, slowly, humbly, until there was nothing left to give. And then it bowed out. That was his teaching. There is a Zen phrase, "When the light is gone, do not seek it in the ashes." The disciples learned this that day, not from a sermon, but from the absence that remained. Master Togen lives on, not in statues, not in scriptures, not in recorded sayings, but in how the monks now move, with care, with presence, with awareness that each moment is a wick, each breath a flame. So when your time comes, be like the candle. Don't worry about your legacy. Focus on your light. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable, a simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble: tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say, "This is who I am." But who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? A novice had a restless mind. He tried to sit, tried to breathe, tried to still the thoughts, but each time he closed his eyes, his mind swirled. Lists, regrets, what ifs, what nexts. He couldn't find peace, and the more he tried to force stillness, the louder everything seemed to become. One morning, after failing again to meditate, he stood up in frustration. "I'm broken," he muttered. And he walked, head down, steps fast, until he nearly collided with the old groundskeeper, Master Rio. Rio was known for his silence. He didn't teach. He didn't lecture. He just tended the gardens and cleaned the gutters. But he had been at the temple longer than anyone. The novice bowed clumsily. "Forgive me, Master." Rio tilted his head, studying him. "You're not breathing like a monk," he said. The novice looked up, startled. Rio turned, motioning for him to follow. They walked in silence through the bamboo grove to the kitchen courtyard, where a wide clay bowl stood filled with clear water. "Sit," Rio said. The novice sat. Rio picked up a small stick, and without a word, he stirred the water, gently at first, then faster, until the surface churned and the reflection broke into chaos. The novice watched. Then Rio set the stick down. They sat in silence. The bowl shimmered, then slowed, then stilled. The novice could suddenly see his own face again in the reflection. Rio looked at him and asked, "Did I make the water still?" The novice blinked. "Number it settled by itself." Rio nodded. "So will your mind." And he walked away. This is the story of trusting the stillness beneath disturbance. Commentary. Many people believe meditation is about forcing silence, forcing peace, erasing all thought. But in truth, it is about letting the water settle. Your mind is like a bowl of clear water. Every thought, every worry, every fear is like a stick stirring it. The more you react, the more you stir. The more you chase silence, the more turbulence you create. But if you sit and breathe and wait without judgment, the water begins to settle on its own. This is the natural wisdom of the mind. You don't need to fix it. You need to allow it. There's a Zen saying, "Muddy water clears itself if left alone." The novice learned something that day, not from a sutra, not from a formal teaching, but from water. He stopped fighting his thoughts. Instead, he watched them. Like leaves drifting across a pond, he stopped demanding they leave, and instead bowed as they passed. And slowly, something began to shift, not instantly, but gently, like the bowl that stopped churning the moment no hand stirred it. This is how peace comes. Not by control, not by perfection, but by patience, by the quiet knowing that nothing stirred stays stirred forever. If you are anxious, sit like the bowl. If you are overwhelmed, breathe like the wind that forgets itself. If you are angry, wait like the pond after rain. It will pass, all of it. And when it does, clarity returns. You'll see your reflection again. Not because you forced it, but because you didn't run. So next time you feel lost in thought, don't fix, don't flee, just wait. And let the water be water. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. There was once a man who lived in poverty. His shoes were worn, his coat threadbare, his belly often empty, and his hands always calloused. But he had a friend, kind and wealthy, who loved him deeply. One day this friend came to visit. They shared a meal, laughed like children, and drank until the poor man fell asleep in contentment. Before leaving, the friend saw how hard the man's life had become. So he quietly took a jewel, a priceless, radiant stone, and stitched it inside the lining of the man's robe. He said nothing. He simply left the gift where it could not be lost. Years passed. The poor man wandered, worked, begged, slept beneath bridges and woke in alleyways. He remained convinced he had nothing, never knowing that a treasure was sewn into his own clothing. He suffered, all while wealth brushed against his ribs, all while forgetting what he already carried. Then one day the two friends met again, and when the rich man saw the state of his companion, he cried out, "Why have you lived this way? Don't you remember? I gave you everything. The jewel has been with you this whole time." The poor man froze. His hands trembled as he turned the robe inside out, and there, nestled in the seam, untouched and waiting, was the jewel. This is a parable from the Lotus Sutra, and it is not about wealth, it is about Buddha nature. It is about the truth we already carry, but forget. The man is all of us, wandering, doubting, working endlessly to find meaning, purpose, belonging, thinking we must earn it, thinking we must seek it, never realizing we were born with the jewel. We never lacked it. We only forgot to look. Buddha nature is not something to gain. It is not granted to the worthy. It is already here, in the one who chants, in the one who steals, in the one who weeps in shame, in the one who laughs too loudly in the back of the zendo. The jewel shines equally. It does not discriminate. In Mahayana Buddhism, this parable is a teaching of Tathagatagarbha, the womb of Buddhahood. It means that all beings, no matter how lost, carry the seed of awakening, not as potential, but as reality. Already whole, already luminous, already stitched into the lining of our very being. The problem is not that we are broken. The problem is that we believe we are broken. And so we search, outside, in teachers, in techniques, in titles, in temporary comforts, all while the jewel sits quietly inside, waiting. There's a saying in Zen, don't seek the truth, only stop cherishing opinions. Because the more we chase, the farther we run from what is already still. In the story, the friend does not blame. He simply says, look. That is the role of the teacher, not to give you the jewel, but to remind you it's there, to show you the thread, to help you turn your robe inside out. Even your flaws are not flaws. They are fabric. Even your pain is not proof of lack. It is the tension in the thread that protects the jewel. Even your delusion is a path, if you let it lead you inward. The poor man's mistake wasn't laziness. It was forgetting his inheritance, just like us. We forget we are enough. We forget we are worthy. We forget that what we seek has always been with us. Buddhism is not about becoming holy. It is about remembering who you are, who you've always been, what cannot be taken from you. Not by grief, not by failure, not by your own darkest thoughts. Sometimes people ask, but if I already have Buddha nature, why practice? And the answer is simple, to remember, to loosen the thread, to notice the glimmer, to stop walking past yourself like a stranger. Commentary. The jewel is not hard to find, but it is easy to overlook, because it does not shout. It does not sparkle in the usual light. It sits in the quietest part of you and waits for you to be still enough to feel it. You may not believe this yet. That's okay. Belief is not required. Only curiosity, only the courage to look inside the robe and ask, what if I am already whole? In a monastery garden, a novice once asked the teacher, where can I find the Buddha? The teacher pointed to the ground. Toes. Then to the novice's chest, heart. Then to the novice's eyes. Everywhere you see, but especially where you never thought to look. You have the jewel. So now, stop asking how to earn it. Start asking how to honor it. Live from it. Speak from it. Let it shape your steps. And when others forget their own jewels, remind them gently. Just like the friend did, a house stood at the edge of a quiet village. It wasn't grand. Its roof sagged a little. Its floorboards creaked, but the door was always open, and those who passed by often entered. One day, a traveler knocked. His shoulders were tight with worry, his breath short. He clutched his bag like it held every mistake he'd ever made. The host opened the door and smiled. "Come in," she said gently. "No judgment here, just tea and a place to rest." The next morning, the traveller left. But soon another came, this time angry. Fists clenched, jaw locked. The host welcomed him too, showed him to a chair by the fire, listened to him shout, cry, fall silent, then gave him warm bread without asking why he was so upset. They kept coming. Joy danced through the garden one spring afternoon, barefoot and laughing. Grief followed days later, slow, grey, soaking wet from a sudden storm. Loneliness showed up in the middle of the night, shivering. Hope arrived unexpectedly, glowing faintly. Fear sometimes knocked twice in one day. Still, the host opened the door every time. One evening, a boy from the village asked, "Why'd you let them all in? Even the scary ones?" The host looked at the boy and said, "Because this house is a guest house, and all emotions are guests. They arrive, they stay, they leave. None of them are me." This story comes from an old Sufi poem by Rumi, beloved also in Buddhist circles. It teaches what meditation often reveals. You are not your emotions. You are the one who notices them, who makes space, who lets them pass through. Anger is not wrong. It is a guest, sometimes loud, sometimes dangerous. But it comes bearing messages, and if you slam the door in its face, it breaks in through the window. Sadness is not weakness. It is a guest. It may rearrange the furniture for a while. It may lie on the couch for days. But eventually, it moves on, especially if you sit beside it instead of pretending it isn't there. Joy too is a guest. And though it's tempting to cling to joy and beg it to stay, even joy must leave. That's okay. You can welcome it again tomorrow. The problem is not the emotions. The suffering comes when we believe they are permanent, when we build whole identities around them. I am anxious. I am unlovable. I am angry. But you are not those things. You are the house. They are just visitors. There's a story of a monk who struggled with anxiety. He tried to push it away, ignore it, meditate it into silence. Nothing worked. Until one day, his teacher said, "Stop fighting the visitor. Invite it in, serve it tea, ask it why it came." The next time anxiety returned, the monk didn't resist. He noticed his breath tightening, his chest constricting. And he whispered, "Welcome, you're here again." He didn't like it, but he didn't hate it either. He watched it, listened to it, sat with it, and slowly it softened, and eventually it left. This is what it means to live as a guest house, to offer your presence, your kindness, your non-attachment to whatever arises. It does not mean you let the guests destroy the house. It means you don't mistake them for permanent residents. You set boundaries, but not walls. You show compassion, not control. You practice presence, not possession. Sometimes guests arrive unannounced. Sometimes they slam the door. Sometimes they cry in the middle of the night. That's okay. You breathe. You listen. You stay grounded in the structure of the house. The breath, the body, the awareness that is always home. Commentary. The guest house reminds us of the temporary nature of all emotions. Nothing stays forever, no matter how intense. And by opening the door instead of guarding it with fear or shame, we reclaim something powerful. Agency. Because when you welcome a feeling, you stop being its prisoner. To be the host is not to be passive. It is to be strong, grounded, compassionate enough to say, "This too belongs. but it will not stay forever, and it is not who I am. You are not broken for feeling grief. You are not failing because fear has returned. You are not weak for missing someone. You are alive, and the guest house of aliveness is open to all visitors, even the ones that make us uncomfortable. When you practice this kind of welcoming, something beautiful happens. You stop judging others for their emotions too. You recognize their guests. You become safer, more compassionate, more real, because you've sat with your own visitors, and you know what it means to offer space. So tonight, when something arrives, a pang in your chest, a wave of sadness, a flicker of joy, pause, breathe, and ask gently, what do you need? You're welcome here. For now. Then let it pass, let it teach you, let it leave, and return to silence. The baby arrived in the middle of the night. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, cheeks flushed with cold, it was placed on the doorstep of the small mountain temple. When the monk opened the door, he found only the child and a young couple trembling in the shadows. The girl clutched her shawl. Her eyes were swollen from crying. "This child is yours," she said. "You are the father." The monk, Hakuin Ikaku, did not argue. He did not protest. He did not explain. He only looked at the baby, then at the girl, and said softly, "Is that so?" In town, the scandal bloomed like wildfire. Hakuin, the respected monk, the teacher, the silent one, had seduced a local girl. People spat at the ground when they passed him. Merchants whispered behind their hands. Disciples left the temple in shame. Still, Hakuin said nothing. He carried water. He chopped wood. He fed the child with one hand and stirred rice with the other. Winter passed, then spring. The baby grew, laughed, cried, teethed on the corner of Hakuin's robe. And still, the townspeople looked on with judgment. And still Hakuin said nothing. Only that same phrase when asked, "Is that so?" A year passed. The girl returned, eyes lowered, voice trembling. She fell to her knees before Hakuin. "I lied," she said. "It was not you. I was afraid. I blamed you." The crowd had gathered now. Some gasped, some hung their heads. She wept and reached for the child. "I'm sorry. I came to take him home." And Hakuin? He held out the child gently and said, "Is that so?" This is one of the most beloved stories in Zen, not for its drama, but for its stillness, for the way Hakuin held the center, unmoved by praise or blame. He did not fight the accusation. He did not defend his name. He did not collapse under judgment. He simply met life as it came. In the West, we are taught to guard our reputations, to clarify, to prove, to explain. But Zen sees the self as a construct, a house of cards built from opinions, images, and roles. And so, Hakuin let his fall, willingly, without resistance. To many, this seems weak, unwise. But in truth, it takes immense strength to say, "Let them think what they will, I remain." Not in apathy, but in presence. Because the ego is loud, but truth is quiet. Hakuin's phrase, "Is that so?" is not sarcasm. It is not indifference. It is a bow to the unpredictability of life, to its mess, its reversals, its harshness and grace. It is the refusal to cling to any label, hero or villain, saint or sinner, right or wrong. There's a famous Zen saying, "Praise and blame are like the wind. To follow them is to be tossed about like a leaf. To stand firm is to become a tree." Hakuin was a tree, rooted, silent, alive. In private moments he may have wept. He may have watched the baby sleep and wondered why the world twists so easily. But his practice was clear. Do not grasp, do not reject, receive each moment, and respond not with reactivity, but with integrity. What would you do if someone lied about you? If the world turned against you? If your name became a weapon? Could you breathe? Could you hold the pain without making it your identity? Could you say, "Is that so?" and keep walking? There's another layer to this story. By taking the child in, Hakuin protected the girl. He absorbed her shame, held her fear, became her shield. Not out of guilt, but out of compassion. And when the truth came, he did not demand apology. He did not say, "I told you so." He returned the child like a leaf to the wind. Because Zen asks nothing of others, only this: be fully present and let go. Commentary. In the modern world, everyone is watching, commenting, interpreting, and we're trained to manage perception, to curate our story. But Hakuin reminds us, your life is not what others say. It is what you do when no one understands you, when you're misread, blamed, dismissed. That is where your practice begins. Hakuin did not defend his innocence, because truth does not need defense. It needs stillness. It needs the refusal to flinch. When asked later why he took the child in, Hakuin said, "Because the child needed care, and the girl needed mercy, and the temple needed the Dharma to be lived." No scripture, no debate, just rice, sleep, warmth, and the ability to say yes to life, even when it doesn't make sense. Is that so? Is not an answer. It's an opening, a breath before reacting. A choice to not fight the river, but to float, eyes open, and maybe even smile. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so..." "Yes?" Another frowned. But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness. A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. All three of you are correct, he said, depending on how you define freedom. He continued, most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us. He looked out the open window. But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances. The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, I failed. There was a pause. One novice finally asked, Then what is the lesson, Master? Shiro replied softly, There are times to steer and times to yield. He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. You cannot hold the wind in your hands, he said, but you can feel its path against your face. He paused, and when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm. The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, carried, yet free. There's a saying in Chan Buddhism. The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass. The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. It was still dark when the monk lit the kitchen fire. Outside, the mountain air clung to the stones like breath not yet exhaled. Frost kissed the corners of the monastery walls, and the wind had not yet stirred the bell. But inside, the kitchen was alive. The Tenzo, the head cook, moved with quiet care. He chopped vegetables with reverence, washed rice as though touching the Dharma, boiled water like preparing an offering to the unseen. Not because guests were coming, not because someone was watching, but because every movement was practice. In Zen monasteries, the Tenzo is not just a cook. He is a teacher, a practitioner, a guardian of presence. His role is not low, it is sacred, because Zen does not draw lines between spiritual and ordinary. It dissolves them, and what remains is just this moment. And this moment includes rice. The great Zen master Dogen once wrote a full text on this, instructions for the Tenzo. He said, "Do not treat cooking lightly. When you cook rice, wash your mind. When you slice roots, cut away delusion." He had learned this lesson young. When Dogen first arrived in China seeking true Dharma, he met an elderly Tenzo in a seaside monastery. The man was in his 60s, sun-worn, with sleeves rolled and hands deep in soaking beans. Dogen bowed respectfully. "Venerable one," he said, "why do you, at your age and rank, work in the kitchen?" The old monk looked up and said, "If not me, then who? And if not now, then when?" Dogen offered to help. The Tenzo smiled. "Thank you," he said, "but this is my practice." Later that day, Dogen saw the same monk drying mushrooms in the sun. He asked, "Why not do this tomorrow? The sun will rise again." The Tenzo simply said, "I do not wait for tomorrow's sun. My life is today." And in that moment, Dogen understood something deeper than scripture. That enlightenment is not found apart from daily life, but within it, in the steam rising from a pot, in the rhythm of chopping, in the patience of stirring porridge without haste. Years later, as a master, Dogen taught his students, when you cook, just cook. Don't think, I am cooking. Don't think, this is just food. Don't think, this is not meditation. Make every motion the expression of the way. In the monastery, the Tenzo bows before entering the kitchen. He arranges the knives, washes the board. He does not multitask. He does not rush. When he stirs everything. When he scrubs the pot, he scrubs the self. There is no low task, only low awareness. There is a koan that asks, "What is Buddha?" One master answered, 3 pounds of flax. Another said, "The rice cake on the shelf." Because Zen knows, the sacred hides in plain sight. Not above us, not beyond us, but within the ordinary, when seen without distraction. In modern life, we resist this. We see chores as interruptions, dishes as delays, errands as obstacles to real practice. But Zen asks, what if the very thing you're avoiding is your path? What if folding laundry is a bow? What if sweeping the floor is a blessing? What if cleaning the toilet is a teaching and letting go? The Tenzo is not trying to finish cooking. He is inhabiting it, with full presence, with full breath, with no need for applause, because practice is not what we do on the cushion, it is how we live off it. Dogen wrote, "See with your ears, hear with your eyes, prepare the food with your whole body-mind." Not poetry, not metaphor, instruction to become so present that the boundaries dissolve. To listen to the rice as it boils, to feel the carrot before slicing, to bow to the ladle before lifting it, because when we fully meet a moment, there is no self left to be enlightened. Only the moment, only the rice, only the breath. Once, a student complained, "Master, I have no time for meditation. I spend all day in the kitchen." The master asked, "Do you wash the rice?" "Yes." "Do you chop the greens?" "Yes." "Then why do you call that not meditating?" Commentary. Zen dismantles the hierarchy between sacred and mundane. It reminds us, you don't need incense to wake up. You don't need chants to be present. You need rice and a spoon, and the willingness to give yourself to both without resistance. If you're waiting for your life to get quieter before you practice, you may wait forever. But if you meet this moment, this task, as the way itself, then even the laundry becomes a sutra. Even the shopping list becomes a mantra. Even the broom becomes your teacher. The Tenzo is not just feeding bodies, he is cooking truth. And when the pot is washed, the ladle hung, and the kitchen swept, there is nothing left to attain, because it was never somewhere else. It was always here. In the steam, in the stillness, In the rhythm of this one breath, the sun rose slowly over the wide green fields, brushing the tops of the grass with gold. Mist drifted over the earth like breath from a dreaming world. And in a quiet corner of the meadow, where the stalks grew thick and the wind passed gently, lived a flock of quail. They were small birds, light-boned and quick, their feathers dappled like earth and sunlight. They lived simply, eating seeds, singing softly, and moving together like a single thought. And among them was one who saw more than the others, who watched not only the sky and the grass, but the patterns within them. He was the Buddha in a past life, and though he had no title or special perch, the others came to trust him, because he noticed what they missed, and he saw what was coming. Each day, the flock flew out into the fields to feed. Each day they returned, wings beating as one, hearts light. But one morning, as the sun rose pale behind thin clouds, the wise quail called the others close. "There is danger coming," he said. The flock stilled. "A fowler is near. He lays traps in the tall grass. If we are not careful, we will be taken." Some of the younger birds flapped their wings in alarm. "Should we stop flying?" asked one. "No," said the wise quail, "but we must act together." He showed them a plan. "If one is caught in the net," he said, "do not panic. Each of us must place our beaks beneath the net. At the same moment, we will lift and fly." "To freedom?" a small chick asked. He nodded. "Yes, together." The flock agreed, and the very next day, the net came. It was hidden beneath the dew-wet grass. A few birds landed without seeing it. With a sudden pull, the fowler sprang the trap. Wings fluttered, cries rang out, but the wise quail shouted, "Now!" as we practiced. The others rushed in, beaks down, wings strong, and together they rose, the net lifted with them, light as silk on the wind. And just beyond the trees, they dropped it, free once more. The fowler, watching from behind a tree, blinked. "Strange," he muttered. "I've never seen birds do that." He returned the next day, and again the next. Each time the net was lifted. Each time the birds escaped. He grew frustrated. "Clever little things," he muttered. "But they won't always be united." And he was right, because fear does not break the flock, but ego can. One morning, two young quail quarreled. "You always land too close," snapped one. "You always peck too fast," the other retorted. Their voices rose. The others turned away, uncomfortable. The wise quail approached them gently. "Remember," he said, "the net does not care who is right, only who is divided." But pride had taken root. The quarrel continued. And the next day, when the net fell again, something changed. The two angry quail were caught. The others flew in, ready to help. "Lift with us," they called. But the two snapped at each other. "You grab that side!" "No, you're too slow." Their beaks tangled, their wings struck each other, and in the confusion, the net stayed down. The fowler emerged from the trees, and that day, not all escaped. The survivors gathered in silence beneath a low fig tree. Even the wind was still. The wise quail spoke. not in anger, but with sorrow. Together we can lift what traps us, but alone, even a feather becomes too heavy. In time, the flock mended. The young quail apologized, and the net, though dangerous, was never as strong as their unity. The fowler eventually gave up and moved on, and the wise quail remained, never seeking attention, never blaming, but always watching, always reminding them it is not the trap that captures us. It is forgetting that we are stronger together. In quiet monasteries, monks would later chant this story beneath swaying trees. They would bow not to the birds, but to the truth they carried. That unity is not just comfort, it is survival. Because in this world, nets will fall. But if we move with one breath, with one purpose, with one heart, even the strongest snare cannot hold us. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. Hospice is not loud, it hums like twilight. Low lights, quiet steps, gentle beeping. And in room 7, the breathing was slow. Draw in, pause, let go. Again, the man in the bed was old, thin skin, tired eyes. Hands that had once built houses and held babies and shaken enemies' hands. Now they simply rested, still, soft, folded like leaves. Nora was his nurse, not young, not old. Calm eyes, a voice like warm water. She didn't rush, didn't flinch at grief. She moved like someone who had seen many endings and knew each one was different. This is not a story of drama. It's a story of breath, and the lesson it teaches when it leaves. The man, his name was Harold, had no visitors that week. His wife had passed years ago. Children scattered, caught in their own lives. Nora checked his vitals, fluffed his pillow, placed a cool cloth on his forehead. He looked at her once and said, "I'm afraid to let go." She didn't respond with philosophy, didn't offer reassurances. She just said, "Let's breathe together then." They sat in silence. Inhale, pause, exhale, again. Harold's breath was jagged at first, then smoother, then softer. He didn't need words. She didn't need noise. The Buddha once said, "As a flame blown out by the wind, so quiet is the mind of one who has understood." That night, Nora came back during her break, brought a small wooden statue, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion. She set it by the window. "Just someone to keep you company," she whispered. Harold blinked in thanks. As the hours passed, his breath grew shallow. Draw in, pause, let go, and one moment. The pause lasted longer. Nora leaned in. Stillness, no panic, no alarm, just the hush of release. She sat beside him for a while after, not because it was protocol, but because endings deserve presence too. Later, she cleaned the room gently, changed the sheets, lit a small candle, and placed the statue back in her pocket. Another nurse asked her, "How do you do this every day? Doesn't it get heavy?" Nora smiled softly. "It's not about carrying. It's about letting go over and over, until even the grief becomes quiet." People think death is about final moments, but in truth, it's about how you breathe. until you no longer need to. Harold had taught her something, not in words, but in how he met the moment, afraid, then still, then gone. The next morning, Nora placed a sticky note in her locker. It read, "Let go like breath." Just a reminder of what Harold gave back to her. In this life, we inhale ambition, loss, joy, sorrow. We hold so tightly. But the final wisdom is the exhale. Not to disappear, but to return everything we borrowed. He was the oldest monk in the monastery. No one quite remembered when he had arrived. He had been there before the abbot, before the bell tower was built, before the bamboo grove behind the kitchen had taken root. They called him Elder Wen. His robe was patched at the sleeves, his back curved like a bowed reed, and his eyes were always smiling, like he had seen something long ago and never forgotten it. He didn't teach, not formally, but every morning he lit the incense before dawn. Every afternoon he watered the moss around the garden stones, and in the evening he swept the meditation hall in silence, the broom moving in time with his breath. You could walk past him and miss him entirely, unless you were paying attention. Then you would feel it, that quiet radiance, like sitting near a warm lamp on a winter night. One spring, Elder Wen stopped coming to morning service. He didn't light the incense, didn't sweep, didn't bow. He stayed in his small corner room beside the main hall, lying on his straw mat with hands folded gently over his chest. He was dying. The news spread quickly. Monks whispered in the corridors. Some feared, some mourned. Some tried to distract themselves with chores. But one by one, they made their way to his room. To say goodbye, to ask for wisdom, to seek some final teaching. But Elder Wen said almost nothing. He just smiled. That same soft smile, unmoved by sorrow, unafraid of what came next. One young monk sat at his side and finally asked, "Master, are you not afraid?" Elder Wen opened his eyes. "Afraid of what?" he whispered. "Of leaving." The old monk chuckled softly, a sound like wind through dry leaves. "Leave where?" He looked around his humble room. "There is nowhere to go." Another monk asked, "What is your final instruction?" Elder Wen blinked slowly, then raised one trembling hand and pointed to the teacup beside his bed. It was half full. The tea had long gone cold. But the sunlight touched it just so, glinting off the rim. He smiled again, then closed his eyes, and that evening, he passed. As gently as a flame curling into smoke. No struggle, no fanfare, just a long exhale and stillness. The monks held a memorial. They chanted sutras. They carried his body wrapped in white cloth to the forest. But what they remembered most was not the ceremony. It was the smile. This is the story of death without fear. The final bow of a life lived in awareness. Commentary. In the West, we prepare for death with wills, hospitals, and quiet dread. We pretend it is far away, or we avoid it entirely. But in Zen, death is not the enemy. It is the mirror that shows you whether you were truly alive. Elder Wen was not afraid because he had already practiced dying. Every time he let go of a grudge, every time he stepped aside for someone younger, every time he bowed in silence, releasing his self-importance. The teacup was his final teaching, so ordinary, so overlooked. But it held the whole Dharma. A cup is useful because it is empty. It can hold, receive, release. But if you cling to the cup itself, you miss the tea. If you fear the cup breaking, you never enjoy what it holds. Elder Wen was ready to leave because he had drunk deeply of life. He had tasted the tea, and he didn't cling to the cup. There's a Zen saying, "Let death come like a welcome guest." That doesn't mean we rush toward it. It means we don't turn our back on it. We live with it, like a quiet friend who reminds us not to waste time. Elder Wen's room is empty now, but the moss he watered still thrives. The broom still leans against the wall. The teacup still rests on the low table, cleaned and dry. And his smile lives in the memory of every monk who sat beside him and realized, stillness is not defeat. Stillness is trust. You do not need to fear the end. You only need to live in such a way that when it comes, you can greet it with a breath and a smile. 7 weeks passed since his awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. 7 weeks of silence, reflection, and growing compassion. The Buddha, no longer Siddhartha, but one who had crossed the stream of ignorance, walked alone in the forest near Uruvela. The world felt both new and ancient. The birds sang with clarity, the wind carried the scent of blossoms and dust, and in every sound he heard the stillness of knowing. But his heart, now free, did not rest in solitude. He knew the truth he had seen was not his to keep. So he rose, wrapped his robe over his shoulder, and began to walk, not as a prince, not as an ascetic, but as a teacher. His feet touched earth gently. His gaze met all beings with kindness, and he made his way towards Sarnath, where 5 men waited, though they did not know they waited. They were the same 5 ascetics who had left him, thinking he had strayed from the path when he accepted Sujata's offering. They had called him weak, indulgent, lost, but he did not carry resentment, only clarity. The journey was long, days passed, villages blurred, children played in the dust, farmers bowed their heads, some offered fruit, some only stared. But at last, in the quiet of a fading afternoon, the Buddha entered the deer park at Isipatana. There the 5 ascetics sat, wrapped in threadbare robes, debating truths with furrowed brows and hollow bellies. When they saw him approach, they whispered, "He has returned. We will not rise. He abandoned discipline." But as he came closer, something shifted. There was no pride in his walk, no hunger in his eyes, only peace. And before they could speak, they stood, drawn to him not by obligation, but by presence. He greeted them with a bow and sat. Under the dappled shade of sal trees, the Buddha began to speak. He did not speak of gods. He did not speak of punishment or reward. He spoke of suffering, what he called dukkha. He spoke of its cause. He spoke of its end. And he spoke of the path, the 4 noble truths, the 8-fold path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He spoke not as a prophet, but as a physician, diagnosing the illness of the world and offering its cure. He taught that the middle way led not to pleasure, not to pain, but to peace. He taught that liberation was possible here. Now the five listened, at first with skepticism, then with stillness, then with something like reverence. And when he finished, he said, "This is the Dharma, deep, subtle, difficult to see, yet available to all who look." And one among them, Kondanya, understood, truly understood. The Buddha smiled. Kondanya has seen, Kondanya knows. And thus, the wheel of Dharma turned for the first time, not with thunder, not with trumpets, but with one man sitting beneath trees, speaking truth to five. That day, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, was born. The Buddha did not seek converts. He sought clarity. He offered a path, not to heaven, but to freedom. And the world, turning slowly, began to wake. That was the first turning, the beginning of a journey that would circle through centuries, that would carry footprints across mountains, across oceans, across hearts, all from one voice, in one park, among deer, leaves, and sky. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. It was a quiet station. Old stone, metal benches, pigeons pacing like monks in mourning robes. The arrivals board flickered. The loudspeaker crackled, and trains came and went, their breath hissing across the platform like tired beasts. Every day just before noon, an old man would arrive. He wore a flat cap, pressed slacks, a wool coat that had seen better winters. He never boarded. He never greeted anyone. He simply sat. Same bench, same hour, same stillness. At first, people thought he was waiting for someone. A son, a daughter, a wife who might never arrive. They glanced at him with quiet sympathy or soft dismissal, but the days passed. Then weeks, and he was always there, alone, unbothered, still. One day, a young woman sat beside him. She was holding a phone in one hand, tapping constantly, half listening to music in the other ear. She kept checking the time, fidgeting, breathing shallow. The old man looked out at the tracks, unmoving. After a while, she said, almost without looking, "Who are you waiting for?" He smiled. "Nothing." She blinked. "Then why are you here?" He paused, then nodded toward the platform. To wait. This is the story of presence, of sitting in stillness with no outcome, no expectation, and no rush. Commentary. The world runs on arrival. We hurry to meetings, chase after goals, measure our worth by progress, but in the Dharma, there is no arrival, only presence. The old man wasn't avoiding life. He was stepping into it, minute by minute, footstep by breath, like a bell that rings just once, not to announce anything, but because it can. At first, the young woman scoffed. She muttered, "That's kind of pointless." The old man nodded. Yes, and peaceful. She paused, looked at him fully for the first time. There was something settled in his face, not detached, just done chasing. He didn't ask her what she did for work, didn't comment on the news, didn't offer advice. He just sat and breathed. The train came. She didn't get on. Instead, she silenced her music, turned off her phone, sat beside him. They shared the silence for half an hour. It was the first silence she'd had in weeks. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The old man said none, and yet peace lingered around him like perfume. He came every day, even in the rain, umbrella in hand, thermos of tea, soft eyes and unhurried limbs. He didn't come to do anything. He came to stop doing. We often misunderstand waiting. We think it's the pause before real life. But sometimes, waiting is life, not for something, but with it. Eventually, the young woman started visiting more often. She brought tea, sat on the same bench, and didn't speak, until one day she asked, "What if the person you were waiting for never comes?" The old man looked at her with a calm smile. "Then I'll still be here." That's the power of presence. It doesn't depend on outcome. It doesn't beg for fulfillment. It simply is. In time, others noticed. A mother sat for 5 quiet minutes with her son. A commuter took off his headphones. A woman reading poetry closed her book and just watched the clouds drift. No one spoke, but something was shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, like morning fog lifting, unnoticed. And then, one spring day, the old man stopped coming. His bench stayed empty, but the silence remained. So did the stillness, and the space he had created. By doing nothing, expecting nothing, needing nothing. Wasn't empty, it was full of something rare. Peace. The young woman still visits the bench, not daily, not ritually, just when the world starts rushing too fast. She sits, breathes, smiles at passing trains, and once when a man sat beside her and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" she answered, "No one," then added, "I'm just here." A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar, but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line. Emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow. All temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. You don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveller reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark. his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share." The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. "Then let your mother see you, and let the boy." Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. "I knew," she said quietly. "I knew you had not died." The Buddha lowered his gaze. "I died to what I was," he said, "so that I could be born to what is." "And us?" she asked. "What are we now?" He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. "I carry you with me," he said, "not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full." Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. "Mother, who is it?" Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. "Is this?" Yasodhara nodded slowly. "This is your father." The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. "You are a king," the boy said. "I was," the Buddha replied, "but everyone says you will always be a king. I have chosen another path." "Why?" The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. "To be a king is to protect borders," he said. "But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same." Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. "Are you hungry?" "I eat only what is given freely." The boy blinked. "I'll give." The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame, just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. "Who is that?" people whispered. "That is his son," someone said. "That is Rahula." When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. "I want to go with him," he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. "You are still young," she whispered. "You have not seen the world." "But I have seen him," Rahula said, "and he is the world." She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. "Teach me." That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter. For that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. They worked for 7 days without rest, 4 monks, bent over low tables, hands steady, breath slow. Grain by grain, they placed colored sand onto a wide wooden platform, creating a mandala of breathtaking beauty. Circles inside circles, lotus petals, Buddhas seated in calm symmetry, tiny bridges crossing into sacred realms. It was more than art. It was a world. And they built it, knowing it would not last. Villagers came to watch. Children gasped. Old men wept. Even travelers paused on their way to market, drawn in by the silence, the precision, the colors blooming under careful fingers. Each night, the monks covered the mandala with a cloth. Each morning, they returned to their posture, like time itself had been paused. Not one grain out of place, not one breath wasted. On the 8th day, the abbot arrived. He walked around the mandala in silence, once, twice. Then he bowed and said only 4 words, "It is time now." One of the monks picked up a long white feather. He reached toward the center of the mandala and drew a single line through it. The design fractured instantly. A second stroke, then a third. The patterns dissolved. The colors blurred. What had taken a week to build unraveled in minutes, like a dream returning to mist. Some gasped, others cried, but the monks only bowed, then gathered the sand in a simple clay bowl. They walked together to the river. With a small prayer, they tipped the bowl, and the sand returned to water, color to flow, form to formlessness. Gone. This is the story of letting go, of beauty not owned, of effort not clung to, of creation not possessed. Commentary. The sand mandala is one of the clearest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, not because of how it looks, but because of what happens after. In the West, we celebrate permanence. We build to last. We frame art. We publish books. We try to leave a legacy. But in Buddhism, there is no permanence, only appearance, only change, only flow. The monks poured their hearts into the mandala, their care, their breath, their presence. They built it not despite its impermanence, but because of it. They knew it would vanish, and they still gave everything. That is love without grasping, effort without ego, joy without needing to possess. The act of destroying the mandala is not cruelty, it is compassion, a reminder. Everything we cling to will one day dissolve. Beauty, youth, achievement, even memory. We can either mourn this endlessly or bow to it. There is a phrase in the Diamond Sutra. All conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, a shadow, like dew or a flash of lightning. Thus we shall view them. It doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more deeply when you know it's passing. You love your child's laughter more when you know they won't be 5 forever. You savor tea more when it's the last cup from the pot. You forgive faster when you realize tomorrow isn't promised. One woman who watched the mandala's destruction approached the abbot in tears. "All that work," she said, "and now it's gone." The abbot bowed. "That is why it was precious," he replied. "When we cling, we suffer. When we release, we flow." This doesn't mean becoming detached or cold. It means seeing clearly and trusting what passes. Trusting that even after the mandala is gone, the hands that built it are still steady. The breath that guided it is still with you. The river still carries the colors. Life is not meant to be grasped. It is meant to be given, again and again, like sand to a current. So build your mandalas, love your people, paint your days with color. But don't try to trap the moment. Let it come. Let it shine. And when it's time, let it go. And perhaps, like the monks at the river, smile while you do. It is said there was once a monk who lived alone in a crumbling hut on the edge of a forgotten village. His robes were patched, his alms bowl was cracked. His sandals made no sound on the stone path. He spoke little, taught no students, carried no scrolls. But people said strange things happened when they met him. A merchant who had been cruel to his workers walked by the hut and wept for no reason. A mother carrying grief for her lost child said the monk looked at her once, and the grief melted into the wind. When asked what he taught, the villagers would shrug and say, "He says only this: there is light, even in darkness." The hidden light. It is one of the most mysterious and profound teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, because it does not promise that suffering will end quickly. It does not say life will be easy. It says only, there is something in you, deeper than pain, stronger than shame, more real than your confusion. It is called Buddha nature, and it exists in all beings. Not just the gentle ones, not just the wise ones, but also in the angry man gripping the bar, in the prisoner lying in silence, in the girl who cuts herself and hides the blade, in the addict, in the abuser, in the one we condemn. The light does not go out. It can be buried, forgotten, covered in ash, but never extinguished. There's a story in the Mahayana scriptures. A group of disciples sat with the Buddha and asked, "Master, does everyone have Buddha nature?" And the Buddha said, "Even this dog has it." The disciples frowned. The dog scratched, barked, chased shadows. But the Buddha saw beyond behavior. He saw the seed, the stillness beneath the noise, the jewel in the dirt. Imagine a gold statue wrapped in rags, sealed in clay, buried for centuries. No one knows it's there, but if you chip away the layers, the gold shines. That is the self, not something to create, something to uncover. We live in a world that measures worth by action. We say, prove you're good, show you're worthy, earn your place. But the Dharma says, you are already whole. Now act in a way that honors that. There's another story. A monk once asked a teacher, if everyone has Buddha nature, why do they act with greed and hatred? The teacher pointed to a clear pool. He picked up a stick and stirred the mud at the bottom. The water turned cloudy. Is the clarity gone? The teacher asked. No, said the monk. It's just hidden. Exactly, the teacher replied. Wait long enough and it will return. The path, then, is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming familiar with what has always been true. About seeing through the layers. Not pushing them away, but noticing. This fear is a layer. This craving is a layer. This story I tell myself that I am broken, unworthy, lost, is a layer. And underneath, stillness, light. You. Some people fear this teaching. They say, if everyone has Buddha nature, what about evil? But Mahayana Buddhism does not excuse harm. It reveals the tragedy behind it. It says, this one too was once innocent. This one too has a light they forgot. This one too is capable of awakening. Not as an excuse, but as a possibility. When you see others through this lens, something shifts. The one who hurt you still hurt you. But now, they are more than that. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you see clearly, because you do not want your own light dimmed by hatred, because you too want to be free. Commentary. To believe in Buddha nature is not to be naive. It is to have the deepest possible faith in what cannot be destroyed. Even by trauma, even by war, even by your own worst mistake. It is the faith that says, there is gold under the clay, even if I've forgotten it, even if no one else sees it, even if I don't yet know how to reach it. The monk in the crumbling hut. He had nothing, but he saw the light in everyone. And so people came, not to learn doctrine, but to be seen, to be reminded, to be held in the quiet truth that nothing in them was beyond repair. Maybe that's your task today, not to fix yourself, but to pause, to breathe, to ask, what if there's still light here? And then, to live from that place. Even if no one else understands. Even if the robe still feels heavy. Because the moment you remember, you become the reminder. Once there was a king who ruled over a vast and golden land. His palace was made of marble and sandalwood. His robes shimmered with threads of moonlight. His name echoed through the valleys like a song carried on wind. But one day, in the middle of a grand festival, the king grew suddenly tired. He stepped away from the court, laid down in the shade of a fig tree, and closed his eyes, just for a moment. And in that moment, he dreamed. In the dream, he was no longer a king. He was a farmer. His hands were calloused. His home was a straw hut. He tilled the soil each morning, worked through sweat and storm, and fell asleep beside a dying lantern. Years passed in this dream. He married, had children, lost crops, buried a son. He aged, sickened, and finally lay dying in his dream bed of straw, holding his daughter's hand. As he drew his last breath, he awoke, back under the fig tree, back in silk, back in the sound of distant music from the palace. No time had passed. Only the blink of an eye, he sat up and wept. This is the story of samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and illusion. Commentary. The Buddha once said, "This world is a dream, a bubble, a shadow. See it as such." But it does not mean the world is meaningless. It means that clinging to the dream, believing it is the whole of reality, is what causes suffering. The king's dream felt real. He loved, he cried, he endured, and yet it was only a flicker in his mind. When he awoke, he was still himself, still whole, still the same awareness, only now, clearer. So too with rebirth. You are born into a form, live a life, gather names, habits, memories, and when that form ends, the awareness that knew it does not die. It simply moves, like a dreamer waking into another dream. Samsara is not a punishment. It is a lesson, a series of dreams to awaken from. Not by denying them, but by seeing through them. When the king returned to court, he no longer ruled with pride. He ruled with humility, with tenderness, as one who knew that even a crown is made of the same dust as a farmer's hoe. He often sat under that same fig tree in silence. When people asked why, he would only say, "That is where I remembered." One day, he invited monks to his court. Among them was a sage known for his stillness. The king asked him, "How do I know which world is the dream and which is true?" The monk replied with a smile, "Ask the one who is watching them both." Who is that? The witness, the awareness, the one who saw the king dreaming of the farmer, the one who sees you dreaming this life. It is not your name, not your face, not even your memories. It is that which knows, always watching, always here, even as the dream changes. This is the mind beyond mind, the unshaken center, the part of you that does not sleep, even when the body rests. The Buddha's teachings do not try to wake you with alarm bells. They whisper. They let you walk the path until one day, under a tree, or beside a river, or in a quiet moment between breaths, you see it for yourself. This is a dream. And yet, I am real. The king died many years later, not in fear, but as one who knew how dreams begin and end. He left behind a poem carved into the fig tree. When I was awake, I thought I ruled. When I slept, I thought I served. Now I know I am neither. I am the dreamer and the waking. So when the world feels heavy or the illusion too thick, sit quietly, breathe, and ask yourself, what part of me is watching this? Not to escape the dream, but to wake kindly inside it. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. Pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever, and yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it. The prince stared at the man as he passed, the way he paused to catch his breath, the way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. A solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. "Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish." Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow, a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self, his earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. The forest welcomed him, but not with comfort. It offered no shade from questions, no warmth from familiarity. Siddhartha had left behind the silk and gold of palace life, and now walked among wandering seekers, mendicants, and sages whose ribs showed like cages, and whose eyes glimmered with discipline or delusion. He sought teachers, and they welcomed him, for his mind was sharp and his determination pure. He studied with Arada Kalama, who taught of the formless meditative realms, places where consciousness floated like light on still water. Siddhartha followed his teachings, and with silent breath and sharpened focus, he reached those plains. His mind became spacious. His thoughts slowed like clouds drifting across a still lake. For hours, even days, he remained in deep absorption, untouched by fear, untouched by want. But when he opened his eyes, he saw the truth. Though his body was still, suffering had not ended. The world remained the same. Hunger still visited the poor. Age still bent the backs of farmers. Death still came to children and kings alike. He bowed to Arada Kalama with gratitude and moved on. Next, he studied with Udaka Ramaputta, who taught of neither perception nor non-perception, of the vast nothingness that lay beyond all forms. Siddhartha once again followed, and again he reached the heights. He learned to let go of sensation, of even the thought of self. He floated, as if beyond the skin of the world. But again, when his eyes opened, the truth remained. Desire still lingered. Aging still came. Death still waited. He thanked his teachers, bowed with reverence, and walked on. He had reached the highest peaks of mind. He had sat in the palace of consciousness. And still, he had not seen freedom. In a grove beside the Niranjana river, he found a band of 5 ascetics who practiced fierce austerity. They believed that the body must be conquered by pain, that by starving it, punishing it, mastering its cravings, one could burn away desire and illusion. Siddhartha joined them. He ate but 1 grain of rice a day. He chewed each grain for long minutes until it dissolved like a breath. He slept in the open, through storm and frost, curled against the roots of trees, his robe no thicker than air. He held his breath until his vision blurred and his head rang with wind. His limbs withered. His skin clung to his bones like silk over stone. His hair fell in clumps, and birds perched near him, thinking him a branch. He listened only to silence. He welcomed pain. He thought it would purify him, but the fire of truth did not rise. He could silence the body. He could silence even the mind, but the ache remained. The ache that asked, why do we suffer? Why do we cling? What ends the endless turning of sorrow? One day, as he bathed in the river, he collapsed from weakness. The water barely reached his knees, yet his strength failed him. His vision dimmed, the world tilted. A young girl named Sujata saw him and, moved by compassion, offered him a bowl of rice milk. Her hands trembled as she knelt before him, unsure if he was a spirit or a dying man. The milk was warm, the grains soft. As it passed his lips, his body stirred, not with indulgence, but with remembrance. The body was not the enemy, nor was the world. In that moment, clarity dawned. This was not failure, this was insight. Neither indulgence in luxury, nor torment of the flesh had freed him. He had lived both extremes, he had walked both shores, and both had kept him bound. He would walk the middle way, not soft and yielding, nor rigid and cruel, not drowned in pleasure, nor crushed by pain, but steady, balanced, awake. He stood and walked back to the grove. The 5 ascetics saw the softness in his step, the colour in his cheeks, and they scorned him. He has abandoned the path, they whispered. He has turned back to comfort. But Siddhartha knew better. He did not argue. He did not explain. He simply bowed and walked on. At the edge of the forest stood a great fig tree whose roots plunged deep and whose branches reached like arms toward the sky. Siddhartha looked upon it and knew, here he would sit, here he would wait. He gathered dry grass for a seat. He placed his back to the tree. He crossed his legs, rested his hands in his lap, and drew a deep, even breath. He made a vow, though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I find the end of suffering. The sun passed. The moon rose. Birds quieted. Winds stilled. And in the silence the battle began, not with sword or shield, but with doubt and memory, fear and illusion. But that was the next story. For now he sat, still, the seeker who had tasted every path, now ready to look within. The next chapter had begun. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people, not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed, in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing, no paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he travelled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen travelled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labor. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. The same quiet voice, the same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The 3rd edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often, the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. Because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes Dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up. And that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The path was dry that day. Dust lifted from the earth like breath from grief. It clung to her ankles, soft and persistent. But Kisa Gotami did not notice. Her feet moved forward, bare and steady. Her arms, once empty with loss, now carried the truth. It had been some years since she had fallen at the feet of the Buddha, begging for medicine to save her dead child. Then, he had sent her through the city, asking for a mustard seed from a house untouched by death. At every door she knocked, and at every door sorrow had already sat before her. Now she understood no house was free from loss. But this story begins not with her arrival, nor her wisdom, but with the silence before it. Kisa Gotami was once radiant with joy. She had married into wealth, borne a healthy son, and laughed easily beneath flowering trees. Her life was not lavish, but it was full. Her husband was kind. Her in-laws praised her for her quiet strength and good nature. And her child was the axis of her world. His laugh echoed through the garden, a sound so bright it seemed to ripple the petals of the lotus pond. But when sickness came, it moved like fire in dry grass. First, a fever, then the cough, then the silence. Her husband wept, her in-laws prayed. Neighbors brought herbs, ointments, and whispered remedies passed down through generations. But nothing stilled the trembling of the boy's limbs. Nothing cooled his burning skin. And then, one still morning, as dew clung to the leaves and the world turned quietly onward, he stopped breathing. Something in Kisa Gotami's mind refused the truth. It broke, not like glass, but like a door slammed shut against a storm. She did not bury him. She could not. Instead, she wrapped his small body in linen and cradled him close, as she always had. She walked barefoot through the streets, her face blank with disbelief, her voice hollow with pleading. "He is only sleeping," she whispered to merchants. "There must be something, some medicine, some root. Please help me wake him." People pitied her. Some turned away, ashamed. Others wept at the sight but dared not speak. A few offered dried herbs or quiet prayers, not to cure, but to comfort. But none could give her what she asked for. Then one old man, gentle and weathered like the bark of the Bodhi tree, placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "Go to the Buddha. He sees clearly. Perhaps he will know what to do." So she did. Through dust and heat, she walked to the monastery, her arms still wrapped around the stillness of her child. Her eyes, dry now, saw only hope. When she reached him, the Buddha met her gaze with unwavering calm. He did not flinch at the bundle in her arms. He did not speak quickly or softly or with sorrow. He simply said, "Bring me a mustard seed from a home where death has not visited. Then I will help." Kisa Gotami bowed deeply, grateful beyond words, and ran. House after house, door after door. She knocked. She asked. She waited. At the first door, a woman with kind eyes shook her head. "My brother died last winter," she said. "I'm sorry." At the next, a man held his son in his arms and said, "If only. We lost his mother at childbirth." At another, a young girl barely older than her own son opened the door, tears still fresh on her cheeks. "Grandfather passed last night," she whispered. Each story struck her not like a blow, but like a chisel, slowly carving away at her illusion. With every encounter, her burden changed. The weight of the child in her arms remained the same, but the grief within her no longer stood alone. It became something shared. A river of sorrow running through many homes, not just hers. And in that shared space, she found the first breath of peace. She returned. She did not knock this time. She did not beg. She simply walked to the Buddha and placed the body of her son before him. Then quietly she said, "I see now. There is no house without sorrow." The Buddha nodded, and without ceremony, without demand, he welcomed her into the Sangha. She shaved her head, took on the robes, learned to breathe again, learned to walk not to escape grief, but to carry it with grace. The seasons passed like silk through her fingers. She became a teacher, not of words, but of presence. Her voice was never the loudest, nor her gestures the grandest, but when she sat beside those in pain, their breathing slowed, their trembling eased. She was the stillness they had forgotten could exist. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the bamboo grove, a young woman arrived at the monastery. Her face was drawn with confusion. Her hands trembled with exhaustion. Her eyes were red, but not yet emptied of tears. She had lost her father. Suddenly, cruelly. Though she had performed all the rites, burned all the offerings, sat in silence beside her mother, something inside her chest would not still. "I do not know what to do with this ache," she said. She asked for Kisa Gotami. The nun sat beside her beneath a neem tree. Birds moved through the leaves above them, and the distant sound of sweeping could be heard from the monastery steps. Kisa did not rush. She listened, let silence breathe between them. Then she placed a small, smooth pebble in the girl's palm. "Carry this," she said, "for 3 days. But each day, speak to one person about someone they have lost. Ask for their story. Then return." The girl did as told. And on the 3rd morning, she returned, eyes swollen, chest raw, but breath moving freely. She knelt at Kisa's feet and wept, but the tears came with space, with rhythm, with healing. "I thought I was alone," she said. Kisa Gotami nodded. "Grief is a shadow," she said. "It grows darker when we sit beneath it alone. But when we share it, it moves, it thins, it teaches." The girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "What did it teach you?" Kisa looked to the far hills, where the morning light softened the edges of the earth. "That the heart does not break from love," she said, "but from the illusion that love can be possessed. My child was not mine. He was a gift. So were the mornings we shared, the soft sound of his feet, the questions he asked at twilight. His death was not punishment. It was part of the changing tide. We do not own the ocean, but we can learn to swim." The girl placed her hand over her heart. "Will this ache ever leave?" "No," Kisa said gently, "but it will grow roots, and from those roots something will bloom. You will never be the same, but you may become more." The girl bowed low, forehead touching earth, and so another seed was planted, not of mustard, but of compassion. Kisa Gotami came to be known not for her loss, but for her light, for the way she listened without rushing, spoke without preaching, held without clutching. She walked through villages not to convert, but to sit, to be, to remind those in pain that no house stands outside sorrow, and no heart must bear it alone. Thus, the lesson of the mustard seed lived on, not in the search, but in the returning, not in the seed itself, but in the soil of shared humanity it revealed. The road to Kusinara was quiet, not silent, never that, but filled with the hush of a world preparing to let go. Leaves rustled without wind. Birds called, but softly, like they too were watching. The monks walked in silence, their robes brushing against dry earth. And at the front, supported by Ananda's steady hand, walked the Buddha. His body was frail. The form that had once walked hundreds of miles barefoot, that had sat unshaken through storms, through temptation, through hunger, now trembled with every step. His ribs showed like lines drawn in dust. His shoulders drooped like branches in drought. But his eyes were clear, bright, as steady as the day he left the palace gates. They reached a grove of sal trees on the outskirts of the small village of Kusinara. The Buddha paused. "Here," he said softly, "let us rest here. This is a good place." The sal trees stood in silent formation, tall, pale, and blooming out of season, their white blossoms drifting like snow. Some monks whispered that the trees had awakened too, that nature itself knew what was coming. Ananda laid down a folded robe beneath his teacher's head. The others formed a soft ring around them, as if holding the space open, sacred and still. The Buddha reclined on his right side, in the lion's posture, facing west. His breathing was shallow but steady. The light of the setting sun turned the dust gold. "It is time," he said. "The body is like a worn cart, held together by straps and will. It has served its purpose. Let it be." Ananda knelt beside him, eyes already full of tears. "You always said not to cling," he whispered. "But I don't know how not to." The Buddha turned his gaze to his beloved attendant. "You have served with a heart free of self, Ananda, for 25 years, never once wavering. You have been my shadow in daylight, my shelter in storm. You are not losing me. You are gaining the path." Ananda bowed, his forehead to the earth. "But the world will feel so empty without your footsteps." The Buddha smiled gently. "Then fill it with your own." Word spread through Kusinara like a breeze stirring dry leaves. The Blessed One is near death. Men and women came with offerings, not of gold, but of rice, of garlands, of silence. Some stood at a distance, unable to speak. Others stepped forward and bowed low, their heads pressed to the soil. A blacksmith named Kunda came, humbly bearing a meal. A dish of mushrooms and tender greens, prepared with utmost care. The Buddha accepted it with gratitude and blessed the man. Later, as pain overtook him, he turned to Ananda. "Tell Kunda this," he said. "He should feel no regret. 2 meals in my life stand out. The first, offered by Sujata, gave strength for awakening. This one gives strength for release. Both are sacred. Both are complete." Ananda nodded, committing the words to memory. The sun dipped low. The monks gathered beneath the sal trees, their hearts heavy. Some sat in deep meditation. Others simply watched their teacher, afraid to blink. The blossoms continued to fall, gently, like the breath of the world slowing down. The Buddha opened his eyes. Perhaps some of you think, the teacher is gone. We have no one to guide us now. But that is not so. His voice was calm, though each word required effort. You must be your own lamps. Be a refuge unto yourselves. Take the Dharma as your island. Do not look outside for shelter. A long silence followed. Then he added, with clarity that cut through every grief, all compounded things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence. He closed his eyes and entered deep absorption, one state after another, like ripples fading across a pond. First through the four jhanas, then through the formless states, boundless space, boundless consciousness, neither perception nor non-perception, and then beyond. His breath slowed, then faded, then stopped. But the silence that followed was not empty, it was whole. The sal blossoms fell across his body. One landed gently on his brow. Ananda did not cry at first. No one did. The stillness was too vast. It reached into them. It opened a space that no sorrow could fill. A hush settled over the grove, deeper than sleep, deeper than night. Even the birds fell quiet. Even the wind held back. And then, as if cued by the moment, the sal trees swayed. Not with breeze, but with knowing, with reverence. The Blessed One had passed into parinirvana. They sat for hours, no words, no movement, just presence. Some monks touched their foreheads to the ground. Others sat upright, spine like a mountain, anchoring the grief in stillness. When finally the moon rose, round and full, like a soft eye watching from above, Ananda stood. He is gone, he said softly, voice breaking. No, whispered another monk, a younger one. He is everywhere now. The cremation took place days later. They built a pyre of fragrant sandalwood, wrapped his body in layers of clean cloth and placed it with care. 8 royal families sent emissaries to claim relics, and a solemn agreement was reached. The remains would be divided equally, enshrined in stupas across the land. But the true relic was not ash. It was the teaching, the 4 noble truths, the eightfold path, the silence behind the breath, the calm behind the storm, the truth that lives on not in memory, but in practice. In time, monks and nuns would walk for weeks to reach that sal grove. Some would come in silence. Others would chant, but all would feel something shift as they stepped beneath the trees. They would sit on the earth where the Buddha last rested and listen, not for sound, but for understanding. And sometimes, if the wind was just right, they would hear it. Strive with diligence. Ananda, as the years passed, returned often. He would sit beneath the very tree where he had knelt that night. He would run his hand along its bark, worn smooth now by the prayers of many. He would remember the final gaze, the final breath, and the words that lingered after everything else had passed away. All things that arise must pass, but the path is timeless. And in the stillness there would be no fear, only peace. And so that is how he left, not in triumph, not in spectacle, but in peace, wrapped in stillness, under trees that bloomed out of season, as if even nature bowed to the one who no longer clung. And in that final moment, the world did not end, It simply continued. Quieter, wiser, and forever changed. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoofprint in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast. A silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called. And when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass. But he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm, the self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone. Dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self-forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too. In the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. Every morning, just before dawn, he sat at the corner of Main and River, cross-legged, still, wrapped in an old grey coat with no buttons. People called him the homeless monk. No one knew his real name. No one remembered when he'd first appeared. But he was always there. Rain or shine, winter or summer. Sitting silently beneath the faded mural of a rising sun. He never asked for money, never held a sign, just a small tin bowl at his side. Sometimes people dropped coins into it, sometimes fruit, sometimes nothing at all. He never seemed to mind. Children were the first to notice him. "Is he sleeping?" one asked. "No," said her mother. "He's meditating, I think." And the child, with all the clarity of someone who hasn't yet forgotten how to see, replied, "He looks like he's listening to the whole city breathe." One barista left him a scone each Wednesday. A florist once placed a single lily in his bowl. An accountant gave him a scarf one January dash, which he later passed on to someone colder than he was. Some scoffed. "He's just lazy," said a man in a BMW. "He's just weird," muttered a teen with earbuds in. But others stopped, only for a second. But they did, because something in his stillness felt like a mirror. One afternoon, a reporter tried to interview him, held out a microphone, asked for his name, his background, his reason. The man opened one eye, smiled gently and said, "I own nothing, but I belong to everything." Then closed his eye again. The story never aired. Too quiet. Too strange. No hook. But those who paid attention began to notice something. Around him, time slowed. Not literally, but in his presence, people put away their phones, looked up, paused. The world, so hungry for more, seemed to forget itself. For just a moment, there's a teaching in Buddhism. To renounce is not to lose, but to see clearly what you never needed. Some thought he had lost everything, a job, a home, maybe his mind. But maybe he had simply let go of identity, of striving, of the illusion that fulfillment lies in accumulation. One day, a man in a suit stopped and asked, "Don't you want something more?" The monk opened both eyes this time. "I already have it," he said. "What's that?" "A clear sky, a passing breeze, and no hunger in my mind." He didn't preach, didn't convert, but every day his presence was a sermon without words, a reminder that peace isn't a destination. It's a decision. Then one morning he was gone. No note, no trail. Just the faint indentation where he used to sit. The mural behind him had faded a bit more, but someone had drawn a small lotus in chalk right where his bowl used to be. The barista still leaves a scone each Wednesday. The florist still visits, and the accountant, now retired, says he meditates by that wall, not to become something new, but to remember who he was before the noise. And in that city, on that street, somewhere between the rush and the silence, a memory breathes, a man who owned nothing, but gave everything by simply being still. There was once a dog who barked at everything, leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside. A dusty patch of land behind the kitchen, where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. "Too wild," they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him We've tried so many things: food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance. But when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. There was once a monastery nestled in the cliffs above a wide, mist-covered valley. Travelers came from all over the land, seeking wisdom from the old abbot who lived at its heart. But no one ever entered without first passing through the gate of questions. It was a tall wooden door, weathered by time, bound in iron, and it never seemed to open, no matter how many times pilgrims knocked. Instead, beside the gate stood a young monk with a calm face and a single instruction. If you wish to pass, you must answer, what keeps you from entering? Some said, my sins. Others said, I'm not ready. One said, I'm too angry. Another said, I'm still seeking. To each answer, the monk bowed and said, return when you are not. And so the pilgrims would leave, some frustrated, some weeping, some silent. One day, a weathered traveller approached. She was older than most. Her robes were plain, her eyes clear. She stood before the gate and read the words carved above, liberation is here. Then she looked at the gate and realized there was no lock, no bolt, no bar, just a handle. She turned it. The door opened and she walked through. The monk beside the gate only smiled, because the lesson had never been in the answer. It had been in the assumption. This is the story of liberation, not as something earned, but as something already available, once illusion falls away. Commentary. Most of us believe the door is locked, that we must be perfect first, clean first, worthy first, empty of anger or sadness or self-doubt. But the Dharma does not wait for your perfection, it waits for your presence. The Buddha did not say, you must transcend before you begin. He said, see clearly, and in seeing, freedom unfolds. The gate of questions was never locked, but the mind said it was, because it clings to a self-image that believes, I am not there yet. I am not enough. I am still broken. But brokenness too is part of the path, and sometimes it is the crack that lets the light through. Liberation is not far. It is not elsewhere. It is not earned. It is the moment you stop demanding anything of the moment and simply turn the handle. The traveller who opened the gate was not special. She had simply grown tired of pretending the barrier was real. She saw the door for what it was, just a door, and walked forward. The monks say the abbot greeted her without words, only a bow, because no celebration is needed for one who sees the obvious. This story is often told to new students when they first enter training. Some smile, some frown, but a few immediately stand up and walk to the edge of the room to check if the door is locked. And when it opens easily, you can always hear the soft laughter of awakening. So if you find yourself waiting for permission, waiting for a sign, waiting to be good enough to begin, ask, what if the door was never locked? What if I only needed to reach for it? And if your hand trembles, that's all right. Just turn the handle. The Dharma is not waiting behind it. The Dharma is the act of reaching. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.